Eric Lorberer is the editor of Rain Taxi, which is a quarterly literary journal based in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Welcome to the Bibliophile.
Thanks, Nigel.
Once again.
Yeah, I should probably add that just because it's a sector that people who aren't in Minneapolis don't know as much, but the other sort of half of my job is producing literary events here in the Twin Cities. And those range from small poetry readings to large events with major authors to an annual book festival called the Twin Cities Book Festival. And that attracts over 6,000 people every year, so for a one-day event. So
you got your plate full.
Yeah, but whether it's through the magazine or through the events, the goal is the same, really, which is to increase the visibility of literary writing and authors and publishers.
In the print form, did you mention? Or just, is it print is of interest to you, right?
Right. One of our core values is being focused on print and championing the culture of print books. That's not to say we're averse to exciting things happening online or digitally or hypertext or any other media, but it's not our core focus. What we believe in is the tradition of the book and the vitality of that magic between the book and the reader. So that is our core focus, and it's definitely exemplified in not only in the selection of things we review and the attention we focus on our events, but we also produce our own chapbooks and broadsides. And that's another way we stay connected to the materiality of what it is to put something into print and the effort and the vision that takes. So,
why do you have this mandate?
Partly because we believe that it is culturally important. We also perceive that it is, I don't want to be dramatic, I don't want to say under attack or anything like that, but it is being devalued in contemporary society. Our society right now is very fixated on screens and on devices in all ways. And of course, that's fine in many ways. It's progress in many ways. It's unavoidable in many ways. But I think that we're at risk of forgetting that this more ancient technology of the printed book has its own values and uniqueness and attributes that we would be impoverished as a society if we left that behind. So that's that perception of current society and the belief that it's important to fight for this is what led us to assume this as one of the main emphases of our work.
And how was Rain Taxi formed in the first place?
Well, we've been around since 1996, so 23 years, unbelievably. It was formed because, as you probably remember, in the mid-90s was maybe one of the first shock waves of the coming culture that was happening. For example, that's when Amazon started. But at the time also the sort of strange thing happening in the book community was the incredible expansion of chain bookstores and a whole related slew of events, a lot of which are, sort of behind the scenes to the average reader, but how tax laws affected how books are distributed, for example, and the various economics that affected how independent bookstores are able to compete with chain bookstores. Various things like that. And the culture of the bestseller, too. That was when it became very common to see giant window displays with, hundreds of copies of a single book, in the shape of a swan or something in a window.
When did Harry Potter kick in?
Yeah, that was a tiny bit later, but certainly was a part of that.
It exemplified that.
Of course, we're not against bestsellers. We're not against, there's no problem with that, except that our perception was that it took attention away, again, from what we perceive as something of value, which is the smaller work of literature that doesn't have a wide mainstream audience, but that has the potential to add something to literature and to gain a following and to become culturally important. I always think of, Ernest Hemingway, first book is printed by Virginia Woolf in an edition of 400 copies. Things that become household names start very small, and they don't start as bestsellers. So we just felt it was important to create a vehicle that would discuss those things that were increasingly under the radar.
And so was it with some philanthropists or foundations, or who was it?
Yeah.
That,
well, we are a nonprofit organization, which means we depend on philanthropists, grants, individuals donating money, sponsors for events, and so forth. And it was tough in the beginning. We were just, young upstarts with a vision but no capital. But, slowly we were able to attract the kind of funding that we needed and to convince those funders that the work we were doing had a place. And I think for many it is sort of logical once they learn about our industry and that, okay, you have a writer writes a book, a publisher publishes a book, but if there isn't anyone paying attention to it, then it's at risk. And so that's where we come in as part of that ecosystem.
So that would explain the kind of books that you choose to review in Rain Taxi then, in large part.
Exactly. We review a lot of emerging writers. We review a lot of small press publishers. We review a lot of books even by esteemed authors in a niche, but who aren't mainstream, well-known names in the bigger culture. But again, it's that belief that the small is valuable. And
well, it's a kind of an incubator too for a lot of these authors, I imagine.
Yeah, it certainly might be. No one begrudges anyone sort of moving up into a wider audience, and having their art be seen by more people.
Yeah,
that's fantastic. But it doesn't. If that doesn't happen, it doesn't mean that it's not of some merit and some value.
Does the magazine still go out to all sorts of independent bookstores across the United States?
Yes. It's still available in about 180 independent bookstores.
Free?
It's free for while it's there for the lucky customers who get it. It's also available by subscription and all over the world. Happily, we have readers interested in it. And then it also appears now and then at various literary conferences and festivals and events that where there might be an audience interested in this kind of literature. So it's a little bit samizdat in that way, a little bit grassroots. Again, it's the distribution method kind of melds with the concept in general of we're not going to be the kind of mainstream magazine somebody buys off the shelf next to, Time or People or I don't even know if those are still publishing. So many magazines have gone away, which is a scary thing when you make a magazine. But again, we're more than a magazine, and in that sense, we're not exactly a magazine. We're a thing with a mission that makes a magazine. So we just find these sort of alternative ways to get it to the people. We also have a very large repository of stuff on our website that is completely different from what's in the print magazine. It's sort of almost a overflow valve for how many, we can't fit everything into print. So each quarter we produce a lot of reviews and interviews online. And those have an exciting life as well, and a permanent life digitally. So there's sort of two different ways people can read the material that we're putting out.
You're located in Minneapolis, so I assume that's where your various readings and book fair, actual physical events take place, or not?
Yes, in Minneapolis and St. Paul, which are together known as the Twin Cities. Yeah, in those Twin Cities are about 15 independent bookstores, which is a very healthy amount for an area this size, as well as, of course, many used bookstores and publishers and activity of all kinds. So this really is a great region for literature, one that really values it and enjoys it.
Yeah, I know that you've got 3 really well-known and well-regarded literary presses. You've got Milkweed, Coffee House, and Grey Wolf.
Correct. Yeah.
And they seem to, particularly Grey Wolf, they seem to be winning awards quite frequently.
Absolutely. They're, as you say, they're 3 of the most prominent presses in the United States, and they're based here in our hometown. But as well, that's just the tip of the iceberg, or the most visible part maybe to the average person. But for example, at our book festival annually, we have over 140 vendors, many of whom are publishers of all kinds with all different focuses and missions and things they're producing. And it's staggering when you gather them all in one room, as we do, to see and appreciate the great range. So again, even though it's on a smaller scale, it's not just the big 3 that are the focus, but just the incredible range of producers. A lot of children's book producers, for example, and presses or activities focused on writers of color or emerging writers, or again, anything you can think of is happening. And I think that's a real tribute to a community that is mutually supportive and that has a fire of encouragement to do this work, to become involved. I would say that's a great characteristic of the Twin Cities.
So very literary then.
Yes, yeah, but even if it's not literary per se, I think there is a value of the book that that carries through. But yes, it's I think really it's a book reading community. Maybe the weather has something to do with it.
Especially today.
Yeah.
Kind of rainy and slushy and
miserable. Yeah, so and then we actually do that book festival at the Minnesota State Fairgrounds, which is a very unusual place for a book event. But we rent 2 giant buildings that are normally, used for state fair activities. We just sort of outfit them with pipe and drape, technology, tables, stages, and produce the whole thing there. So it's a lot of fun. It's a little bit of a whimsical spot for it, but it's one of the few really large spaces that is accommodating for such a large event. And we didn't want to be in, for example, a hotel or a conference center. It wouldn't be the right feel. But then, in addition to, a sort of that monumental, it's like throwing a wedding. Every year it's just so gigantic. But then throughout the year we'll do totally different things. And so, for example, in this past year, sort of on the bigger side, we've had an amazing event with Michael Ondaatje, in conversation with Louise Erdrich, who lives here, and that is that was just a blockbuster. Over 600 people came to that. But at the same time, or in the same month, we had a poetry reading with a non-speaking autistic poet. A totally magical and interesting event but much smaller. Not someone who's well known yet, but someone we thought was important to put in front of an audience and let people experience this is also literature. So we do these events in various spaces. We don't have our own building or performance space, and while that creates some logistical problems, it's also a benefit because it pushes us out into the community, and it lets us work with people in the community for the common good, and that's really exciting.
How do you find, say, compared to 10 years ago, what's the level of interest like? Same? Greater?
That's an interesting question because the perception and probably even the statistics are being skewed by technology. For example, by the fact that podcasts and webcasts and so forth make certain things accessible in a different way. So we might actually have smaller attendance at certain events than maybe 10 years ago, but I don't think that means there's less interest. I think it means actually that there's more interest. It's just that people are choosing different channels to get the same dose of things they want. We all know, for example, that one of the most common attributes of books is that they're shared. They're shared in libraries, they're shared by friends, they're given as gifts, they're so forth. And again, this sort of skews the perception. We don't just have a one-to-one count of how many people liked that book. I think it's great. I think it's a great thing. It's numerically a frustrating thing, but I think it's one aspect of the book culture that teaches us numbers aren't everything. The experience is what matters, and creating that experience for other people is what we're ultimately about, not the number of people. But that said, another thing, for example, is that I think you could measure the level of interest as greater in the sense that, as I said earlier, there are so many producers more and more getting into the field and getting excited at any level. And so, for example, we post on our website a page called the Twin Cities Literary Calendar. What this does is we list everyone's literary events in all the cities. So it doesn't matter whether it's ours or whether it's a publisher's or whether it's a bookstore's. If it's something a person could attend to hear an author, we list it. And it's very interesting because you'll see sometimes, wow, there are 15 events happening on one night, you know? And it's like, oh, well, George Saunders is appearing here, but in another place, Ann Carson is reading, or it's just sort of crazy. And then, of course, many local authors, many authors of all kinds, mystery writers, children's writers. But it's just sort of staggering to have this grid to actually see, oh, here's the real story. And it's very exciting.
When did the calendar kick off?
We started that, I think, about 4 years ago, maybe.
Yeah. Okay, so it's not that long ago.
Yeah, I'm bad with time. It's could be longer, but it's a fun tribute to activity.
Obviously, it's a service to the community.
Exactly. Time. And again, that's one of our, being service-oriented is a value for us. We want what we do to be useful. It's not an academic exercise for us. Whether it's the reviews or the events or a service like the calendar, we want this to have a real effect on people. That's what it's for. There is now a annual Independent Bookstore Day, which allows the independent bookstores to sort of trumpet what they're doing, and they have special sales and special events and so forth, and it just calls attention to and celebrates what they're doing. And we have gotten involved in that by producing a little passport that has information about all the independent bookstores here in the Twin Cities, and just supporting this initiative in that community way.
Is that a national day, by the way?
It is, yeah.
When is it?
It's a different day every year, but I believe it's always in April.
Okay. Maybe Shakespeare's birthday, the 23rd.
Well, I think they choose a certain Saturday to make sure that people can actually go to the stores. But it's fantastic. And again, it's sort of an activity, or I would almost say an activation of our values to encourage people to get out there and support their bookstores.
So it really does sound like you're serving as a kind of a catalyst for encouraging this culture of reading and the book. I just wonder if anyone else in the States has approached you to try and reproduce your model in some way, or are there others out there doing similar things?
I think that's one of those things that's both yes and no. To an extent, there's probably something unique about what we're doing, in the same way that, for example, even though the 3 big publishers based here that you named earlier are all publishing literary material, they all have a unique perspective. So one house's novel or book of poetry is going to feel different than someone else's, even though they might sort of come from the same space. So so I hope there's a unique artistry in what we're doing in both the blend and the execution. But that said, yeah, I'd be thrilled if, I think it's the case that maybe we've helped motivate or encourage others to do similar things, as we ourselves were motivated and encouraged by positive things we saw. I can tell you that we get a couple of calls a year from other cities about how to do the calendar, because they're interested in that. And oddly, it seems like a unique resource, like other cities don't have anyone doing that.
From my experience, it's kind of hit and miss. Mm-hmm. Some cities do, and it's it's developed through a magazine or the daily newspaper, or
I mean, newspapers are doing it, but the reason we started doing it was we realized that because that's not their main job, they were hit and miss in what they were able to list. Also, probably space is a serious concern, as they should. Newspapers list all arts activities in their area, but by definition they give more attention to the bigger, splashier ones and so forth. And so again, we just thought, what's needed is a literature-focused organization to take up the mantle of focusing on these specific kinds of events. We started it because I was finding I was missing readings I didn't know about. I wasn't getting the information. And I thought, if even I, who is very plugged in to the literary scene here, am not hearing about something, then there's a defect in the system.
What about, just finally, what about the future? Have you achieved the goals that you'd set out early on in the organization's life, or have you still got a ways to go?
The particular goals we have are not ones that one can say, now we've succeeded at that.
It's kind of a work in progress, is it?
Exactly. Yeah. The effort to champion aesthetically adventurous literature, to bring attention to marginalized writers, to focus on print culture and works of merit, artistic merit, all of that is not, you don't finish that project. It keeps going. We've certainly had successes. We celebrate those successes. Every time a reader is motivated to get interested in a book, we feel that's a success, but it doesn't mean we can stop. I always said, if the world develops to the point where there's going to be poetry reviews in every day in the paper, then we can probably stop. Then the culture has changed enough. And I could sort of imagine that world. Somebody showed me a newspaper, this was probably 15 years ago, from France, and on the front page was the beginning of a story that said, Paul Auster has published a new novel. And I just thought, this is crazy that this is front page news, but it's beautiful. Like that would be a very interesting society in which thought the newspaper thought that was interesting. If we could do that in a consistent way,
Well, the government over there puts in a fixed price for books so that you can't sell them for under a certain amount. That big stores and small stores are on the same level. So we don't, although they're closing for a variety of different reasons, they're not closing at the same rate they are over here.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think actually independents are. I've seen a couple of reports that show that there's a bit of an upswing in the last year or so with independent bookstores here in North America. I don't know if you've seen that, but anything in particular you're working on for the next year, or it's the same kind of it's the same suite of activities that you've been
Yes.
involved with each year?
It's the same suite of activities, although I will say that your question about the future comes at a good time. Next year will be our 24th year, so I think we will be asking ourselves as an organization, what should our 25th year be like, and what should there be any change in our ideas or our platform? That's the right time to ask that. We're all grown up now,
Yeah.
So I think we'll be spending some time trying to digest some of these big picture questions and see if anything has changed enough since when we started over 2 decades ago to warrant any change in our practices. Because as I say, we want to be responsive, we want to be practical, we want to be relevant, and if that means adapting, then we want to adapt. So we'll be asking ourselves that. And come back and help us ask it.
I'm very happy to do so. Always love coming here, Eric. Well, thanks for that. It's great to hear that you're still actively promoting literature and the book. It's something that I have been doing for years, and it's just such a fascinating endeavor to be involved with. So.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you, Nigel. I agree. Kindred spirits.
Eric Lorberer, who's the editor of Rain Taxi. Do you have anything else on your title?
I'm also the executive director of the nonprofit organization Rain Taxi that sort of administers all the various programs that we've been talking about.
And your website is?
Raintaxi.org.
Very good. Thanks again.
Thank you.